Aster gave him a look, signaling him to shut up. He then turned to Mio with a pitiful look. People can go crazy if they can't sleep. Let's create a safe, upright, and beautiful world together. Actually, Aster knew Mio was shy, so he made this decision. His conscience was aching, seeing them unable to decide. He'll show it an innocent smile and said to Aster, if you feel uncomfortable, let the night sleep alone. You can sleep next to me if you want. Hearing this, Mio became anxious and quickly agreed. But he warned, if you choke me, I'll pry open your head with a knife. Don't blame me then. Aster, standing nearby, had a bad feeling. Even if he didn't choke him, he might still get hit on the head. And so, the four of them began their cohabitation. He'll also manage to sleep outside the library for once. A few days passed, and rumors of a ghost haunting the Queen's palace emerged. It was said that after midnight, a ghost in white clothing would appear, a stay felt strangely familiar. It seemed that in any world, ghosts were white clothes. They said it walked back and forth in the hallway, muttering "where is it?" while searching for something. When Ellie asked what exactly it was looking for, Anna went into storytelling mode. Of course, it's looking for the person who killed it. Once found, it will surely use its fingernails to choke the person, then drag away the corpse. The three listened with great interest. Sir Cress, standing nearby, let out a dry cough to interrupt them. Looking terrified, he said, "It doesn't seem appropriate for ladies to discuss such things." As expected, he was teased by the three. "You're not afraid of ghosts, are you?" Just hearing the word ghost made him jump, but he still denied it, insisting he wasn't scared at all. That night, after Astel if ghosts really existed, there were rumors of a ghost in the Queen's palace. Even the weak cries and constant moans of the so-called Queen seemed so authentic. After a chaotic scene, the Queen successfully gave birth to a prince, but he couldn't feel happy at all. What Nurse Carmen is suspected of colluding with dark mages. Arrest her immediately, then the body was dragged away. Aster asked Hill if ghosts really existed. He thought Hill would be the most knowledgeable about ghosts. Hill looked indifferent. He thought it was more likely to be a maid in a white nightgown than a ghost. Although he couldn't absolutely say ghosts don't exist, he hadn't sensed the kind of power here. Hearing that ghosts might exist, Aster screamed in fear. As a modern person, he couldn't accept the concept of ghosts at all. Hill seemed used to his outbursts and ignored him, turning to ask Mio if he was going to sleep in the same bed with him again. Mio reminded him that it was originally his bed. As expected, the two started arguing again. They had been living together for just over a week, but they fought every day. Although Hill's condition had improved, he would occasionally wake up screaming and attack Mio beside him. The next morning, he would use healing magic on him. This cycle repeated for several days. Astor thought Hill would go back soon, but he particularly liked the prince and the prince liked him too. When holding the prince, his expression of happiness was very similar to Yuga's. Astor couldn't help thinking, the person who should love the prince doesn't, while someone unrelated dotes on him so much. Is this his fortune or misfortune? Watching the two argue endlessly over the bed, Astor separated them. As the owner of the room, I have a good suggestion. Grand Magician, why don't you return to your domain and continue your previous research? Hearing this, Hill instantly turned ice cold. Aster quickly changed his mind. Aster was splattered with blood. The strong smell of blood made her feel like she was about to faint. Fear filled his brain. Although that would be good, your insomnia hasn't been cured yet. Your health is our happiness. Then he quickly pushed them both onto the bed to rest, turned off the lights, and went to sleep. He believed that the more cowardly you are, the longer you live. That night, Aster, unable to sleep soundly, got up to get a glass of water. As soon as he opened the door, he encountered the female ghost the maids have been talking about. It was clear that everyone's guesses were incorrect. Aster approached to bow to the queen and offered to escort her back to her chambers but was refused. She said she was looking for something but didn't know where it was. When Aster asked what she was looking for, the queen laughed for the first time. The queen had been searching for something, yet she didn't even know what it was. Aster thoughtfully offered to accompany the queen on her walk until she remembered. As the two were about to leave, the queen suddenly stopped. She turned to Sir Alex behind her and said, "There's no need." Alex seemed a bit flustered. "What if there's danger?" The queen interrupted him. "If there's real danger, you won't be able to help me anyway." Ever since he fell in love with Yuga, the queen no longer opened her heart to him. The king threw the bloody sword on the ground. He called for Yuga in a voice so gentle it was chilling. The king gently wiped the blood off his face. "Blood splattered on you?" "I'm sorry." Yuga held the little prince. They looked like a family of three, smiling frighteningly in such a bloody scene. Aster could only helplessly curse these two lunatics in her heart over and over. Aster never thought he'd witness a scene straight out of The Escape. The queen's palace was dim, silent, and desolate in the night. But it wasn't unpleasant. The two arrived at an abandoned room. With a creaking sound, the door to the storage room opened. The queen clearly touched a hidden mechanism in the darkness. Aster was amazed. There was actually a hidden chamber here. They climbed up a dark spiral staircase. There was yet another door here. All of the queen's actions and expressions were very natural. Logically, she had just moved to this palace and should know about these hidden places. This was just a small attic. The queen casually searched through things, but she still couldn't remember what she was looking for. Depression eats away at the soul. She didn't even have the energy to think now. It was truly pitiful. Among the readers of The Escape, many sympathized with the queen. At this moment, Aster couldn't help but ponder, if someone more useful than himself had come here, perhaps they could have changed the queen's tragic life. But reality is often cruel. There are no what-ifs. Aster decided to do what he could. He cheerfully said to the queen, "How about we play a treasure hunt game? Let's find things you think are interesting here. Maybe as we search, you'll remember." The queen nodded with interest. Under the faint candlelights, Aster began a joyful exploration mode. Suddenly, Yuga smiled and greeted Aster. His cheerful personality even infected the queen a bit, the queen who lost her child and the prince's nanny who couldn't find her way home. Even though they weren't friends, Aster suddenly felt like he was in his own world. Having a pajama party with friends, time passed and the candle burned halfway down. But there seemed to be only miscellaneous items here, nothing of value. The queen remembered she was looking for something deeper in the basement, but she didn't know where the entrance was. At this moment, it brightened outside the window. The queen quickly stood up. Her complex expression was extremely painful. It was dawn. People from different worlds and classes can become friends. Aster accompanied the queen all night. Until dawn, they found nothing. Then he escorted the queen back to her chambers. When he entered his own room, he suddenly remembered the little prince in bed. Fortunately, he was sleeping soundly. Aster finally felt relieved. He sat down gently, tiptoed into the blanket, careful not to wake the little prince. He reached out and pulled her up. "I thought you were a serving maid. Sorry for frightening you." As he gently patted the prince to soothe him, he thought the queen was likely depressed. When people encounter misfortune and become depressed, they might forget everything they don't want to remember. But Astor hoped that what the queen was persistently searching for was the little prince, even though he might be the cause of a depression. After staying up all night, Astor fell into a deep sleep holding the prince. Early the next morning, Sir Cress knocked on Astor's door to wake him up. After a series of clanging sounds from inside the room, Astor came out wrapped in just a bath towel. This action stunned Cress. This was because Mio and Hill were sleeping inside, so Astor couldn't change clothes. Moreover, the only shawl had been soiled by the little prince's spit-up milk. If he came out directly in his nightwear, it would make Sir Cress even more confused. So Aster had no choice but to do this. It was truly embarrassing. He didn't expect last night's stroll to have such serious consequences. Aster asked Cress if there were any floor plans of the queen's palace. He could only claim that in case of fire or earthquake, they could escape quickly. Cress smiled awkwardly. "You should have confidence in the knights around you." Aster was very firm, believing that one must rely on oneself to survive. Cress reluctantly agreed to do his best to help find them, but since it involved the queen's safety, he might not be able to find them. After class, Aster said goodbye to teacher Cress. Aster was trembling with fear, but Yuga kept smiling brightly. "You must be scared. We used some extreme measures earlier because we were worried you might run away." As he turned around, he was startled by Hill standing at the door. He hurriedly pushed Hill into the room. It would be terrible if others saw him, but he'll keep talking. He kept rambling. "I might as well teach you myself. Stop learning, you're affecting my sleep. And when I wanted to go out, Sir Mio stopped me." Aster stared at Mio, deeply moved. He thought he was sleeping, but it turned out he was engaging in a silent battle. However, the taciturn Mio didn't receive any of the information Aster was trying to convey. Aster took the little prince from Mio's arms and asked him, "Can you get the floor plans of the queen's palace? I want to know where the basement is," faced with Hill's inquiry. Aster said, "I just feel like the ghost of the queen's palace is in the basement." Hearing this, a strange look flashed in Mio's eyes. Aster wanted to help the queen. He asked Hill about the location of the basement in the queen's palace, but Hill said, "Even with the floor plans, you can't go there. I sense magic permeating the basement. You need magic to enter and exit." Then he left without saying much more. That night, Astor was asking Mio about Hill's whereabouts during the day. Suddenly, Hill jumped out, scaring Astor half to death. He said with a bright smile, "I want to try sleeping outside." Obviously, his target was the little prince, but he was met with a unanimous refusal from Astor and Mio. In the middle of the night, while Astor was sleeping, he dreamed of hearing the queen calling his name repeatedly. The king came over and asked, "Is this the maid you mentioned?" Then he reached out and lifted Astor's chin. In a daze, he stumbled to the door. As he opened it, he was startled by the queen who had been waiting for a long time. She stepped forward and put a matching shawl she had specially prepared on Astor. The soft touch made Astor feel like flowers were blooming on his back. He said to the queen, "I might not have come out. You might have brought this for nothing." But the queen looked sad and said, "I was thinking it would be nice if you were here tonight." "I kept thinking that." After saying this, the queen smiled, which was rare. It was the first time in Astor's life he had heard such words. This feeling of being needed and expected warmed his heart. As they were about to leave, Sir Alex followed closely behind. The queen still refused his company and turned away resolutely. Astor, having read the original story, knew well. Alex's concern for the queen was genuine because in his memory, it had always been the queen. He remembered the queen's smile from when she was young. Afraid she might catch a cold, afraid she might prick her hand while admiring flowers, always taking care of her meticulously. He said expressionlessly, "Perfect." He even now guarded against a fragile maid. All his concern was genuine. How could someone who truly loved the queen fall in love with Yuga? It was incomprehensible. The two arrived at the former reception room. Back then, the king had those who disrespected Yuga arrested. Now, due to lack of staff, it had been abandoned. The queen thoughtfully found a pair of shoes for Astor. Astor suddenly became curious and asked the queen if she had ever been afraid of marriage. No one had ever asked such a question before. The queen and the king were engaged when she was 17. She was young then and didn't understand anything. She just found it incredible that they gave her such an honorable position when she still had an older sister. Astor remembered that the queen's sister married into another country not long after her younger sister's engagement. She was said to be a person with strong character. The queen was engaged to the king at 17. At 21, the whole country knew the king loved Yuga. She only entered the palace and became queen at 24. She should have had many thoughts during those 3 years, but now she couldn't remember anything clearly. And what's truly frightening is not knowing anything at all. In this country, everyone was supporting the love between the king and Yuga. Whether intentionally or not, the queen's existence was gradually being forgotten. Astor told her about the real basement, which required magic to enter. "My son's wet nurse is gone, you'll be the one now." The two handed the child to Astor and left. The queen started mumbling, "So that's how it is. The nanny was a magician. It seems you can't take me to the basement. Neither you nor I can." The queen said this with utter despair. From this moment on, Astor knew what he had to do. Those who don't work don't deserve to eat. It was time for Hill to repay his debt. Astor crouched by the bed, carefully examining the sleeping Mio, thinking how handsome this man was even while sleeping. Normally, he was sensitive to sounds and should have woken up already. It seemed Hill had put too much pressure on him. As he was thinking, Mio softly called out, "Astor, you're going to stare a hole through my face." Astor purposefully replied, quite naturally, "Then get up." Then Astor stared at Hill, sending out eye-beam waves. But Hill just turned over, falling into an even deeper sleep. Mio saw Astor's intention and asked if he should wake him up. After receiving an affirmative answer, he directly clapped loudly right next to Hill's ear. The loud noise almost burst Astor's eardrums. Hill was naturally startled awake. He was stunned for a moment, then realizing the situation, he felt like killing Mio. He gritted his teeth and grabbed Mio's collar, about to act. When Astor called out to stop him, "Let's make a deal." Hill was sick and needed to hear someone's breathing to fall asleep peacefully. The most effective was the little prince's carefree breathing. Sleeping Hill was dangerous, so he had always been forbidden from approaching the little prince. Just then the queen came in and glanced at Astor. Astor's proposed deal was to let the prince sleep next to Hill until he fell asleep. In exchange, he would take him to the basement of the queen's palace. Hearing this, Hill was overjoyed. He agreed at light speed and took out a magic shard. With this, one could move twice, but the number of uses couldn't be increased because Astor's magical talent was almost zero. Hill gave Astor a magic gem that allowed 2 movements. Astor wanted to see if it was real. He was about to bite it when Hill hardly stopped him because there were traces of black magic inside. Astor was a bit surprised, so black magic really existed. Could it be that the queen's nanny was really a black magician, as the king said? He'll explain that black magicians weren't accepted by others and were strongly rejected by this world, but he still respected them. A magician's quality and talent were determined from birth, but black magicians were people who made a choice. Originally unable to use magic, they experienced miracles due to very sincere reasons. Hearing this, Astor couldn't help but ask if he could become a black magician. But Hill said Astor had no sincere hatred or desire, so there was no possibility. Moreover, black magic required corroding one's own soul and not even being seen as human by others. Astor deflated like a balloon and slumped on the table. Strangely, even the Emperor didn't show up. Seeing the pool of blood on the floor, she understood everything. The Queen, her heart as dead as ashes, walked out of the room expressionlessly without saying a word. His desire was just to go back home and sleep next to his mother. Even magic probably couldn't achieve that. Don't remind him again, although I don't know why you want to go to the basement. Remember, you only have 2 chances. The next morning, the Queen's sister, Countess Kjai, came again. She had been coming frequently lately, but the 2 sisters didn't seem close. After pouring tea, she sat silently with a gloomy expression for a while before leaving. Occasionally, she would say something like, "Let me have a child." It was really perplexing. How could the Queen help her with such a thing? At noon, while Aster was resting, Ellie rushed in urgently. "You need to get dressed quickly. Count Kara is coming." Anna beside her was also very excited. They hurriedly pushed Aster to go get dressed up. It must be said that Klein was very popular. The 2 dragged Aster to the room's doorway. Aster quickly blocked it because there were traces of men inside. Mio was very careful, but he'll treat it like his own room, faced with their terrifying, confused expressions. Aster could only lie, saying that when he opened the room, Klein had just arrived, so it wasn't good. This explanation was easy to accept because in the previous life, Mina had said that Aster's room was messy. Just then Klein arrived, he came to see Aster, still holding a bunch of white flowers, dressed dashingly handsome. The 2 sat together on chairs in the courtyard, not saying a word. And so Aster became the little prince's wet nurse and nanny. It had been a full month since she arrived here. Aster occasionally stole glances at him, feeling extremely awkward inside. He had told him he had lost his memory, not expecting it to turn out like this. No matter how he asked, Klein wouldn't say anything about that girl. Could it be that he wanted Astor to remember on his own? Klein stared at Astor, smiling as he said, "You tie your hair up now. You used to always wear it down. You seem to think it looked better that way." Astor understood his expression. It was as if he was reminiscing about something through him. In fact, they both had a lot to say to each other but still couldn't find a way to converse, so the conversation couldn't continue. Astor wanted to ask if the pen was from him, but the words caught in his throat. He stood up, indicating he had to leave first. Klein's expression turned disappointed, but then he graciously agreed. That night, Astor fulfilled the deal, letting Hill sleep next to the little prince. His sleeping face was as peaceful as a prince's, meaning he was slowly being healed, but there was still some uncertainty. Handing the prince over to the not-quite-normal Hill now made Astor feel a bit guilty. He didn't actually like children, but this was work, so he wanted to do his best at everything he could. Just then, Mio opened the door. He came in and Astor apologized for Hill's situation, but Mio said if he felt sorry, then don't bring others back anymore. But what you say often comes true. Only now did she learn her full name was Aster Kane. No wonder in the novel, when mentioning the prince, it would describe, by the prince's side, always stood Sir Millet with his cold eyes and a young wet nurse. He walked into the room and stared at Astor for a very long time. It seemed like he wanted to say something. But in the end, he just sighed softly and said sleep well. Astor didn't ask further. He extinguished the oil lamp and they bid each other good night. Late at night, the 3 in the room were all sleeping soundly. Only Astor was sleepless. He looked at the night outside the window, thinking the door halfway through sleep. He didn't know what time it was. And when did the Queen start wandering in the empty corridors? Aster carefully got out of bed, lit an oil lamp, put on a shawl, and went out to look for the Queen. Tonight seemed particularly dark. Alex suddenly appeared, gesturing to Aster to go to the balcony. Aster's hand paused on the balcony door for a moment. If this life was in a game, would this moment be a crossroads in life? As the sound of branches opening the door rang out, the Queen's sorrowfully beautiful figure appeared in the moonlight. What is a sense of tacit understanding? The Queen knew it was Aster without turning around. This young wet nurse was Aster Kane, still seemingly a nameless minor character. She asked, "Do you know the feeling of waiting for night to come every day?" Aster could also relate to the feeling of not wanting morning to come. Then the 2 shared a knowing smile. Aster gave his shawl to the thinly clad Queen, hoping she wouldn't catch cold. The Queen felt a warmth and sincerely praised Aster's kindness, but Aster felt he didn't deserve to be called kind. If he were truly kind, he would have fallen for the prince he spent day and night with. and he wouldn't have told Klein he had amnesia, and he would have taken more active steps to help the pitiful queen. He believed his current actions were just some insignificant sympathy. Astra learned that the queen had been suffering from insomnia every night since the wet nurse's death over 2 months ago. Astra hoped he could help her find what she had forgotten to ease her insomnia. Astra reached out his hand and told the queen, "I've found a way to the basement." Hearing this, the queen was overjoyed as if basking in spring sunshine. She gripped Astra's hand tightly. "Then we can find the treasure today." Astra reminded the queen to be careful because it was very dark down there. But the queen revealed a secret to Astra. Long ago, she had lived in darkness where she couldn't see her own feet. What tragic experiences the queen had endured, no one but herself knew. Clearly, the queen was unfortunate as Romeo, frustrated by unrequited love and Hill, the great magician who had to go to war. How could one survive in such a position? Should she stay true to the original story and get close to the protagonist or disrupt the plot? Prince Carl, who grew up not knowing his birth mother's face, and countless others all had their own misfortunes. The only ones who could sleep peacefully in this palace were the king and Yuga. Everyone praises the beauty of love, but why have all the people here become unfortunate because of it? Astor led the queen to the attic from last time. She took out the gem she was carrying. He reached out and embraced the queen, and as Hill had said, he tried hard to imagine the basement. Suddenly, the gem emitted a dazzling light. The space before their eyes became distorted. With a whoosh, the two appeared in the basement. Astor looked around. There wasn't a single window here, yet it was surprisingly bright. He accidentally took a step forward. The ground emitted a buzzing sound and a huge light. Startling Astor when he came to his senses, he felt something was even more wrong. This on the ground seemed to be blood. Astor had brought the queen to the basement, only to find the floor covered in blood. He trembled with fear. He had been in this world for over 100 days, always feeling things weren't good. But upon seeing this magic circle made of blood, he realized his life had been quite comfortable. The transmigrated maid accidentally became the young wet nurse of the little prince. Perhaps she could imitate Night Mio, brainwashing the little prince, constantly whispering in his ear, "Your father is a big jerk." Just then, the queen beside him muttered to herself, "This is the place." She walked to the magic circle and crouched down. Her touch immediately made the entire circle light up. She and the wet nurse had drawn this. She had started it, but the wet nurse later modified it. Astor asked who she was, but the queen didn't answer. She pointed to the bed in the magic circle. "I'm here, he's there, and on the other side are the wet nurse and him." Astor inquired about the purpose of this magic circle. The queen still didn't answer directly, instead recounting the past. It turned out that since the queen's marriage, the wet nurse had worried about her inability to conceive. She would often say, "A queen without power. If she can't even produce an heir, surely has no future." The queen looked at Astor, her face filled with sorrow. "What else could I do? In this world, what should I do?" Astor couldn't offer a specific solution. He could only comfort the queen, just like you've always tried, continue to live on. The queen's expression was melancholic. She paused for a moment. She continued to recount the past to Astor. The wet nurse hated the king and Yuga. Because they were unkind to the queen, the wet nurse had spoken of revenge against them. The queen slowly walked into the magic circle. Although King Aegis loved Yuga very much, she needed an heir. And the queen's family, who cared nothing for her, also hoped she could give birth to an heir. The next day, the head maid called Astor over and explained that royal wet nurses would be granted quasi-noble status. Having read the original story, Astor knew this was equivalent to raising her rank in the marriage market. Hearing this, Astor had already understood much. Then the queen said this is a magic circle that can make people pregnant. Astor was shocked. He instinctively fled at lightning speed, hugging a nearby pillar, shouting, "I think I just stepped on it. I'm not ready to have a child on my own, but in fact, not just anyone could get pregnant." When he heard that the magic circle needed to be drawn with the blood of 2 people who wanted to have a child, Astor was shocked. Such a large magic circle, using only 2 people's blood, wouldn't that drain them completely? The queen continued to explain, 2 people stand in the middle of the magic circle, perform the ritual, and pregnancy can occur. It must be said, this was truly a groundbreaking infertility treatment. If the wet nurse went to modern times, she could definitely make a fortune. Since then, the queen had always thought her experience was a dream. Only now, coming here, did she realize it was all real. She stroked the bed in the middle of the magic circle, saying, "You asked me before if I was scared when I got married. Actually, I don't love him. I never have." The queen didn't love the king. Even though she let herself become a laughingstock, she felt a bit angry inside, but actually it didn't matter. Quasi-nobles themselves couldn't inherit titles, but if their spouse also had quasi-noble's status, their children couldn't inherit. So young unmarried quasi-nobles like Aster would be in high demand. It seemed her idle life was finally about to turn around. She fantasized about young, handsome knights coming for her. Aster's sweet daydream was interrupted by the head maid's loud voice. From the moment you sign this contract, you'll be responsible for raising the prince. Please consider it carefully. The queen showed a relieved smile, but it made one's heart ache. Aster was glad the queen thought this way. When he had watched The Outcast, he had always thought the queen endured so much humiliation because of her intense love for the king. It was better that she didn't care because she didn't love him. After composing themselves, they began to search for treasure in this place. But before long, Aster regretted making this decision. There was an eerie, horrifying atmosphere everywhere. Bloodstained blades and various black magic potions. It suddenly changed from discussing life to a horror film. Suddenly, the queen appeared from beside him. She took out a pocket watch from a box nearby. When opened, it revealed a portrait that looked exactly like Prince Carl. The queen seemed to remember something, her eyes darkening. She said she had found what she had forgotten. She then gave the pocket watch to Aster. With a complex expression, she said something incomprehensible. Now it's time to sleep again. After returning from the basement, Aster never saw the queen again. 1 day, 2 days, 3 days, Aster waited alone with an oil lamp, expecting that figure. But from behind, Sir Alex's hesitant voice came, "It's better to sleep at night." Aster returned to his room. Hill suddenly jumped out from the side, startling Aster. It turned out the prince had woken up in the middle of the night and not seeing Aster had been crying. Aster felt bitter inside. This was the king's order, not something she could consider. Then she picked up the contract, but she instantly froze. Mio had taken a long time to soothe them back to sleep. Hill was complaining on the side that Sir Mio was terrible at comforting children. Aster took the little prince, apologizing to both of them, saying he wouldn't go out anymore. The next morning, Aster carefully examined the pocket watch. It fell at least 100 years old. After inquiring with Serja, he learned that the name written inside was How Quadlin. Yuga's surname was also Quadlin. Could it be a coincidence? But the portrait inside seemed to resemble both little Wang and Yuga. Could Carl Quadlin be Yuga's ancestor? But why would this item be in the basement of the queen's palace? Aster recalled what the queen had said. The 2 men in the basement that day should have been the king and Yuga. Why were there 4 of them? Whose blood was used for the magic circle? What exactly was the wet nurse's revenge? Aster's mind was in chaos, unable to understand anything. He suddenly remembered something and asked Hill behind him. The basement was full of mysteries. Aster suddenly thought of something and asked Hill, who was playing with the child nearby. Black magicians can't be identified if they don't use magic, but if they are fellow magicians, they know each other's identities. The king and Yuga were not magicians. Just then, Mina's urgent knocking came from the door. Aster stood up abruptly. He quickly picked up the little prince and told Hill to find a place to hide. A top scorer in the college entrance exams Chinese subject have fallen so low. This is utterly humiliating. He left behind an unhappy Hill, hurriedly running to the door. Mina excitedly said that Count Caleb was coming this way. Aster was exasperated, thinking not again. Hearing the noise, Anna came running over. With a bright smile, she said, "He promised to introduce his deputy to me." Then he took the little prince away with a blissful expression, muttering to himself, "At least it's above the rank of baron now." Hearing this, Ellie rushed out of the room, shouting something like, "That's what he told me to." Aster was shocked. When did this man start making promises to everyone? Why didn't he introduce me to this first? Everyone was discussing heatedly. The sound of a door opening was heard. Today, Caleb was as dazzling as ever. He called out to Aster affectionately and smiling. He presented Aster with today's white bouquet. He turned his head to greet Ellie and Anna, asking them to wait for a moment. Then he pushed open the door behind him. Deputy officers Ventson and Gibbs came out and saluted. Aster marveled, so Caleb's position allowed him to have 2 deputies. He hadn't lied. Aster sized up the 2 men. They were clearly mature gentlemen with taste and discretion, completely different from the young, chattering guards of the queen. Aster couldn't help but be impressed. It was obvious that Ellie and Anna were very satisfied with the 2 men, easily captivated by male charm. They allowed Caleb to take Aster away for as long as he wanted. Soon after all the maids were sent away, he hurriedly looked for a mirror. Strangely, why would an illiterate person have a pen among their personal belongings? She could only weakly tell the head maid that she couldn't read. Actually, being illiterate was quite normal for a commoner. Aster suddenly sold out, was panicking. Suddenly Caleb picked him up from behind and headed straight out of the queen's palace. All the maids were astonished, their eyes wide as saucers. Aster felt extremely embarrassed. Dear audience, thanks to me, you've witnessed something quite extraordinary. Peppa quickly stepped forward to help open the door. She even gave Aster a big thumbs up from behind as if cheering for his victory. The two arrived at the courtyard, seeing Caleb's horse. Aster exclaimed inwardly, "This horse looks exactly like its owner." Caleb lifted Aster onto the horse's back in one swift motion. Then he mounted and rode off at full speed. Riding a horse for the first time, Aster was so scared his heart was about to fly out. The steed passed by the training ground. Aster immediately spotted Mio, who was training. Caleb forcibly took Aster away on horseback, but they encountered Mio on the way. The consciousness of being a working person made Aster constantly explain in his mind that he wasn't intentionally skipping work. After a bumpy ride, Aster imagined that they had finally arrived at Caleb's place of memories. As beautiful as a paradise. However, now that she was to raise the prince, she couldn't have such a basic flaw. The head maid would send a teacher to teach Aster. However, the reality was that they stopped in front of a suspension bridge on a cliff edge. Aster, shocked, pointed to the other side and said, "How can there be a house on the edge of a cliff?" Its eerie appearance was just like Dracula's castle. Caleb smiled brightly. "You've said something like this before." Aster hadn't expected that the original owner not only had a similar personality to his, but also possessed a modern sense of humor. Just as they were about to cross, the white horse accidentally stepped on a crumbling stone wall. It became frightened and refused to go on. The two had no choice but to walk up. Aster trembled as he went first. Caleb reached out his hand and promised, "Even if I had to put down my sword, I won't let go of your hand." It must be said, every sentence was extremely romantic. Because for a knight to say he'd put down his sword was equivalent to being willing to give up his life. Aster placed his hand in Caleb's palm. "If I fall, you'll save me, right?" Caleb, blushing, gripped Aster's hand tightly, reassuring him. "As long as I'm here, you won't die before me. Even if I'm covered in wounds, I'll protect you completely." They finally reached the house. Sunlight filled the entire courtyard. Unexpectedly up close, it had such a cozy feeling. This was where the original owner and that person had lived. On her first day as a wet nurse, Aster moved to the room next to the prince's. The queen's breastfeeding times were 3 times a day, morning, noon, and night. Aster inexplicably felt that the people who once lived here were very happy, but for him, it was a strange place. Although the original owner looked exactly like him, they were different people. This body didn't have the ear piercing he had gotten to commemorate his 20th birthday. Unlike me, he wouldn't immediately cut his hair when it grew long. Even his hair quality was better than mine. I had hoped that coming here with Caleb would restore the original owner's memories to know what I needed to conceal so I wouldn't have to be so nervous anymore. Unfortunately, this body had no reaction at all. What happened to the original owner's soul? How long did they live here? After entering this house, would I finally be able to understand their relationship? What did this man really think of the female lead? On one hand, reminiscing about the past, on the other, confessing to the female lead. Astra finally arrived at the place Caleb had mentioned where he used to live. The two entered the house. Reportedly, he had a weak constitution and needed long-term care. Located on a steep cliff, the air here was excellent. But looking at the height, Astor felt a bit weak in the knees. He thought to himself, at least it's clear he doesn't have a weak heart. Suddenly, Astor remembered the white bouquet in his hand and wanted to find a place to put it. Caleb very skillfully took out a vase from a cabinet. At this moment, Astor spoke up and asked, "You never told me before what kind of person that lady was. Was it because you wanted to tell me here?" Caleb, with a blissful expression, said, "I fell in love with him the moment I saw him." But besides these times, the queen didn't want to see the little prince, because she hated the smell of children in her room. "He's the most beautiful person I've ever seen in my life. It's as if the sun rises just to see him. Flowers bloom just to praise her." Astor sighed, thinking she must have been truly beautiful. Caleb, like a lovesick fool, went on endlessly. "She's not just beautiful on the outside. Even her shadow and breath are. She's a work of art carefully crafted by God." Astor let it go in one ear and out the other, once again praying that the original owner hadn't fallen in love with him. Astor said calmly, "You really loved him, didn't you?" But Caleb stared at Astor with a smile, saying something that could be misunderstood, "You're the same." Astor was momentarily dazed, but after thinking about it, he felt that Caleb probably meant the original owner loved him too. When Caleb spoke of his deceased lover, it was as if they were still by his side. How deep must his love be to be like this? According to Caleb's description, that girl treated Astor like her own little sister, as if cherishing her other half. Caleb was about to go to war, so he brought Aster to revisit this place before his departure. Unexpectedly, there was going to be another war. This country had never become a battlefield, so people in the capital enjoyed peace, but wars never ceased outside the country. Those small countries without heroes like Caleb could only become vassal states or perish. At this moment, Aster was very grateful that he hadn't been reborn in such a country or in this world's unique vampire kingdom. Caleb would leave within a month. This time he was going to a small country called Rohe. Aster wasn't sure where that was either. The military preparations during this period would be very busy. But Caleb kissed Aster's fingertips, saying gently, "No matter how busy I am, I always have time for you." Why was he constantly speaking in riddles in this place? Faced with this man's sweet words, Aster's heart couldn't help but skip a beat. He hurriedly withdrew his hand and changed the subject. "Is it because you only have time today that you brought me here?" The queen's attitude towards the little prince was even less kind than towards the maids. Aster could understand. She quietly held the child, comforting him. "Your dad doesn't care about you. Your mom doesn't love you just because you're not the fruit of love, but not all children are born from love, so you're not that unfortunate." In fact, Caleb hoped that by coming here, Aster would regain his memories. He looked around and said, "You used to like it here too. I wanted to see you happy." Caleb looked at Aster with a radiant smile. "I hope you can be happy forever. I hope even more that I'm the one who brings you the happiness." Without the original owner's memories, Aster still felt only unfamiliarity with this place. But apparently the original owner and that person seemed to be at their happiest and most natural here. Aster hoped to find a diary or other traces here so he could understand that person better. Aster asked where his room was, but Caleb turned red, embarrassedly turning his head away, saying it's not polite to enter a girl's room casually. But when asked about that person's room, Caleb took Aster's hand and led the way. Aster couldn't help but think sarcastically. He doesn't know where Aster's room is, but he knows where the ladies' is. They arrived at the room. The furnishings were simple yet elegant. Aster searched through the cabinets. But apart from dust, there was nothing else. Caleb muttered that when he left, that person had burned everything. When Aster asked who that person was, Caleb just smiled without saying anything. Aster discovered another staircase outside. It seemed to be an attic. Soon a new character appeared, Circea, the teacher chosen by the head maid for Aster. His elegant demeanor and strikingly handsome appearance made Aster exclaim with joy. The furnishings inside looked like the original owner's room. Aster asked if there was anything left behind. Caleb continued to speak in riddles. "If it were that person, would you burn your things?" Aster's fists clenched in frustration. So who exactly was that person? He always stopped short at crucial points. Aster continued to ask, "Was I his maid before?" Caleb calmly replied that although called a maid, only the two of them lived in this house. It was more like being a companion who could talk. To a store, this sounded like someone talking without considering the consequences. Such a large house. And the original owner did all the housework alone. Just thinking about cleaning made him want to cry. A store once again expressed his desire to know more about him, especially since Caleb was about to leave. And so the story began to unfold. The first time he saw him, Caleb wished he were a poet. That way he could express his feelings more delicately. His name was Eddie. Caleb emotionally told Aster the story of himself and his moonlight love. His name was Eddie. He had eyes as clear as the ocean, a fragile and kind beauty. He had been weak since birth. As soon as he was old enough to understand, he and Aster came here to recuperate. Later he met Caleb. Aster was speechless. To think they would confine a young daughter on such a steep cliff, what an extraordinary family. In Caleb's eyes, Eddie was like a pitiful flower, but he wasn't just fragile. He was also a strong person who would draw his sword to help others. The person telling the beautiful story had an expression as beautiful as the story itself. But how similar was the lady in his story to the real Eddie? Aster felt strange about himself. Why did he approach all stories with a skeptical attitude? At least it gave her a bit more motivation to study what's it like to take care of a child and study at the same time. Reportedly, Caleb and Eddie's meeting could be considered a faithful encounter. That day, the gardener and the young lady were picking flowers. Suddenly, they heard a crash not far away. The young lady dropped her umbrella and ran towards the sound. They found an injured and unconscious Caleb at the bottom of a cliff, because the young lady wanted to save him. The gardener had no choice but to use his small frame to carry Caleb back. At first, the gardener didn't like Caleb. It seemed he was afraid Caleb would take the young lady away. Aster carefully asked when did he pass away. Although he didn't want to touch on Caleb's pain, he felt that except for here, Caleb wouldn't talk about Eddie's story again. Caleb's expression turned sad. He went to the place where twilight falls 3 years ago. According to this, the original owner entered the palace only a year ago, so the 2 years in between became a blank. There was a great obstacle between Caleb and Eddie, and that was his only relative. His brother was a mediocre knight because Caleb was a world-class swordmaster. He became jealous and insecure, constantly obstructing their marriage and causing various troubles. Even after Eddie's death, he refused Caleb's request to take the body. Although Caleb and the young lady hadn't held a ceremony, they already had a real relationship, so he hoped that after his death, he could be placed with Eddie. In the early hours while the maids were still asleep, Aster had to get up to care for the child and study, as Cersei only had this time slot available. It must be said that there's only a thin line between romance and horror. Caleb stared at Aster with a shy face. Then he stepped forward and held his hand. He said affectionately, "I'm sorry too. Although I asked him to send you to my family, I couldn't find you." From Caleb's words, Aster learned that when the original owner and the young lady were together, there was an atmosphere that no one could intrude upon. Just by quietly looking, one could tell how much they loved each other. It seemed they had reached a state where they were indistinguishable from each other. Caleb squeezed his hand again. His brother hadn't left anything to remember him by. "After you disappeared, I realized he wanted to completely erase Eddie from my world." He stroked Aster's loose hair, his face full of smiles. "This is good now. Through your eyes, I can finally see him again. People should rely on themselves to feel more secure." Caleb spoke words of love to Aster, hoping he would return to his side. But Aster was content with the current situation, not wanting to rely on anyone to live. Caleb covered his heart with his hand, looking sincere. "I don't want to lose you again. When he hid you away, you can't imagine how desperate I was." However, Aster was very clear-headed. What did this have to do with him? If the original owner and Caleb were in a loving relationship, he would feel a bit guilty and wouldn't refuse like this. But he was seeing Eddie through Aster, so there was nothing to say. Although leaving the palace under his protection, he might have a comfortable life. But it would mean ending Aster's life here with this name. If so, could he return to his original world? Although he didn't know why, Aster increasingly felt that he should stay in the Queen's palace. Aster asked, "Don't you feel sad looking at me?" Even Mio had to wake up early. Aster struggled a bit feeding the child while listening to the lecture. But Caleb looked enchanted, smiling as he said, "You are joy and happiness to me. You are the meaning of my life." But Aster expressed that seeing him made him sad. In reality, he was thinking that he was surrounded by handsome men, yet there wasn't a single character he could pursue. It was truly depressing. Fortunately, Caleb was a gentleman and chose to respect his decision. Caleb was about to go on an expedition and asked Aster for a token. Aster instinctively protected it. He told him to come to the Queen's palace next time for something else. Caleb agreed and placed a kiss on the back of his hand. Just then, the sound of horse hooves was heard. The entire house began to shake. The furnishings inside toppled over. Aster quickly ran outside. He felt exasperated, thinking some madman was riding a horse on the cliff. But unexpectedly, the arrival turned out to be Mio. With a righteous face, he stated that he had come to take Aster back. Caleb didn't want to let him go, saying that besides Aster, many others could take care of the prince. But Mio went back down, saying there was only one wet nurse. Aster looked exhausted, feeling like they were using him as an excuse to compete secretly. Suddenly, Mio grabbed Aster's arm, wanted to take him away, saying the prince had been looking for him since earlier. But in reality, the prince was happily playing with the childcare expert, Ellie. Aster thought this was unlikely. Mio glared at Aster with displeasure. He even extended his foot to step on him. The two secretly competed. Aster reluctantly decided to return with him. Fortunately, the letters here were similar to English, so learning wasn't too difficult. Before the prince grows up, Aster needs to teach him some basic knowledge, so the learning will focus on being able to read fairy tales. Turning around, he saw that Caleb's hand was already on his sword. A great battle was about to break out. The little servant girl had achieved the status of a great heroine. Mio came to find Aster clashing violently with Caleb. Just as Caleb was about to draw his sword, Aster was shocked. If they really fought, Mio would surely lose terribly. To appease the furious Caleb, he smiled and said, "Let's write letters. I can write now, we can talk slowly." Caleb was instantly placated. He happily said goodbye, stating he would come for Aster's letter within half a month. Upon hearing this, Mio became unhappy. He grabbed Aster's hand. Suddenly, he confronted Caleb. "Sir, shouldn't such things be asked of your girlfriend? Aster has no relationship with you. There's no reason to give you a token." They started arguing again. Aster felt his ears burning with pain. To interrupt them, he immediately began to act. "Please don't fight because of me." Aster was secretly delighted. This was one of the classic lines that one must say once in a lifetime. He had finally achieved this goal. However, Mio stared at him with disdain. He told Aster to stop talking nonsense and lifted him onto the horse. The two of them galloped down the cliff on horseback in a whirlwind. Aster's terrified screams echoed everywhere. After seeing his appearance, his face was instantly covered in black lines. This actor looked exactly like him. Astra nodded seriously in agreement. Suddenly, Circia smiled and leaned closer. Now, please call me teacher. When they reached level ground, Aster was already lying exhausted in Mio's arms. However, Mio said he was heavy and told him to quickly testify. Aster immediately started to play tricks. Just pretend the person sitting in front of you is the one you love. But Mio was very straightforward, saying they weren't comparable. Aster ignored what he said and continued to rest. He found it strange how Mio had found him. It turned out that Hill had used the magical item he had given Aster earlier to find his unique wavelength and teleported Mio nearby. Aster was annoyed, feeling as if he had been stalled. Suddenly, Mio asked Aster what his relationship with Caleb was. Aster didn't answer directly, teasing him is a complicated relationship. As expected, Mio got a bit angry. If I push you here, you'll fall down. He was indeed petty. Aster, while fixing his hair, explained that he had once served Caleb's love interest. Because the love interest situation wasn't public, no one knew about it. Suddenly, Aster remembered the little prince. Was he really crying nonstop when Ellie was taking care of him? He had never looked for Aster. Mio's eyes wandered guiltily, saying he was crying continuously before I left. Aster saw through it. It was obviously an excuse. He found it very strange. Why did Mio come to find him? Caleb was a protector of the kingdom. What good would come from being with him? Astra looked at Jo up close. Her face suddenly turned red with shyness. Mio clearly loved Hugo. He even went to the extent of brainwashing the young prince for him. Estelle thought Mio was stingy, childish, yet kind. He was hard to figure out. He reminded himself not to have any misconceptions about him. He had even choked the great magician in the middle of the night, the day after Estelle and Mio safely returned to the queen's palace. He asked teacher Saya about the correct way to write Caleb Kara. He decided to embroider a handkerchief as a token. After staying up late, he finally completed it. Astor was confident in his embroidery skills. Hill suddenly poked his head out. Upon seeing Caleb's name, he looked disgusted. Something must have happened on the battlefield. Hill seemed to dislike Caleb very much. Astor pushed Hill onto the bed, letting him lie down next to the little prince. Hill put his finger in the sleeping prince's hand. He was instantly melted by cuteness. After a while, he fell asleep. Mio handed the little prince to Aster. They both said good job each other. Aster felt that recently, he and Mio were like an old married couple raising two sons together. It seems she hadn't been in love for too long and had no resistance to handsome men. During this time, Yuga often came to the little prince's room. Aster turned off the oil lamp and fell asleep while gently patting the little prince. In the middle of the night, he suddenly heard violent coughing. He drowsily turned on the light. The scene before him shocked him greatly. Mio, expressionless, was tightly choking Hill's neck. Aster hurriedly pulled him away. This will kill him if it continues. Only then did Mio slowly release his grip. Astor stood in front of Hill but was a bit scared. Mio had even choked him before. Mio still showed no emotion as he adjusted his clothes. Great magician, remember this? That's what being choked feels like. Astor was stunned for a moment, so he was helping him get revenge on Hill. But Astor felt that treating a sick person like this could easily lead to trouble. Mio, however, said Hill was very dramatic and didn't want to get better. The two had a heated argument, just like a couple discussing their child's education. This woke up the little prince. Mio picked up the prince and gently patted him to soothe him. He hoped the magician could give him and Aster each a protective charm. If he had gone berserk and retaliated just now, Mio would have died on the spot. Hill was aware of the danger. He handed magic vials to both of them and asked them to fill them with blood. Mio swiftly took out a small knife and filled one vial. Aster couldn't help but ponder. If the little prince could remember, would he recall Yuga, who occasionally came to sing for him, or the queen who fed him 3 times a day? Watching Yuga sing, Aster couldn't help but ask, "You seem to like the little prince a lot." Yuga, holding the child, smiled happily. "It's fortunate that you're the prince's wet nurse." He then turned and left. Astor was still concerned about the little prince's safety. It turned out that Hill had cast an absolute protection spell on him the day before, meaning that even if the prince attacked him, he wouldn't retaliate. There are many things in this world that are beyond one's control, so he couldn't give others the right to harm himself like that. Aster could tell from his appearance that something must have happened, but at this moment, he was very concerned about Mio's unusual mood. Just as he was about to leave, he'll call it out to him. He sincerely apologized to Aster, saying, "I'm sorry. You must have been very scared." At that time, Astor was both scared and angry, but now he inexplicably felt like crying. Astor didn't respond, just asked him to help look after the little prince. Then he closed the door. These two are really in love. Astor found Mio on the balcony. He expressed his gratitude for tolerating his stubborn and unreasonable demands. "So, did you take action today because you couldn't bear it anymore?" Mio instead asked Aster why he brought the magician back. Aster felt it was instinctive with no particular reason. Mio didn't want to admit he was getting revenge for Aster and also wanted to get a protective charm for him. He just made a gesture with his hand on his neck saying, "I just wanted to choke him." Aster was also grateful to have become the wet nurse. In the novel, many people escaped to avoid danger, but there was no scene of the wet nurse being executed. She should be able to survive until the end, right? "That's all," suddenly Mio said sorry. Aster was still confused. Mio was rummaging through his pocket. He said he didn't mean to and didn't know when it had fallen to the ground. He handed over a tattered handkerchief. Instantly, Aster's shocked cry echoed throughout the entire palace. At night, he'll begin to have nightmares again. The elder magicians who had trained him before, in order to make him the perfect great magician, unanimously decided to forcibly inject their magic power into Hill's body. If successful, he would become an unprecedented test subject. After some time, Hill finally woke up, but he suddenly went berserk before learning how to attack. In an instant, all the magic teachers were wiped out. Suddenly, the scene shifted to the battlefield of an expedition. Raging fires were burning and screams were everywhere. The ground was littered with soldiers' corpses. He wanted to save them, but at this moment he couldn't distinguish who needed to be saved. You get told Astor that if she needed anything while caring for the little prince, she could always tell him. Astor remembered what the queen had said about not naming the child yet, because everyone was shouting angrily at him. Hill's nightmare caused him to go berserk again. His magic power was leaking uncontrollably. He directly blasted people into pieces, friend or foe. He was awakened by this bloody scene. The first thing he received was Aster's concern. "Fortunately, it's safe here. It's not that hell, but a peaceful place with people. I probably won't find a place like this again." The next morning, Hill was awakened by the sunlight. Seeing the empty room, he suddenly felt afraid. He abruptly stood up, wanting to go out and look for them, but he heard discussions outside the door. They must be dating. It turned out that Ellie and Anna had known for a long time that Aster and Mio were living together. "So she told you that the little prince needed a name and a doctor." Yogo was a bit surprised. He didn't expect Aster to actually make requests. This made him look at her with new respect. Aster was quite careless and often wore Mio's clothes. Anna said, "Thankfully, it's a good thing I'm slow. If someone else had seen it, it would have been a big problem. Look, her door is open again." Suddenly, his expression changed to shock. The three of them just stared at each other. The secret of the three living together was discovered. Hill had no choice. He immediately used magic to promote the two. He snapped his fingers to hypnotize them. From now on, they would forget the existence of that room. Even if they saw the room, they wouldn't remember anything about him. That evening, Aster sat in the room sigh. Mio, holding the little prince, was also nervous, like a child who had done something wrong and didn't dare to speak. He looked at the atmosphere between the two. He started to persuade Aster. "He's so pitiful, I can't bear to watch, just forgive him." Aster was furious. "First to ask my embroidery if it forgives him. I finally finished it and now I have to start over. There's not much time left." That day, Klein came to see Aster. He would be leaving for battle in 3 days. Aster wrapped the music box parts in the handkerchief he had originally embroidered. He gave the female one to him. "The music box won't work without all the parts. Return it to me later. There are so few things from the original owner." "I had no choice but to give you this." Klein seemed a bit surprised. He had seen it before in Eddie's small room. Yoga stated that the child's name should be chosen by the king and queen. This feeling was like recovering a lost heirloom. It was exciting. Then Aster took out that pen. However, Klein's expression revealed something strange. "This is a mine. I've seen him with this pen. It seems he gave it to you." Klein stared at Astor very gently. "Promise me if anything happens, go to Caliph. I have no interest in the kingdom's war. I only hope my participation will benefit you." He kissed Astor's hand. "No matter where I am, I will definitely return to your side. because you are the meaning of my existence. Aster said expressionlessly, please return safely, but in his heart he was very clear. If I didn't know about your girlfriend, would these words be a little sweeter? Klein finally left for battle. He wouldn't be seen for a while. The crowd was boiling like a parade. That day, teacher Sayed told Aster that now he not only had to learn to read and write, but also learn etiquette, social manners, and writing like a noble education. Now Astor was one of the top bride candidates in the kingdom. Many people would think that getting her would elevate their status. Teacher Saya was also quite frank. I'm also interested in improving my status. But the next second he said, but I'm more interested in you as a person. Astor thought he looked so radiant saying this. This sudden display of humble reasoning left Aster in disbelief. Yuga continued, I'll talk to His Majesty about the doctor. After all, the child is weak. Suddenly he leaned close to Astor. Today's lesson was learning social dance. Saya took out something like a speaker from his back. Then he gentlemanly extended an invitation. He pulled Aster up in one swift motion. His hand on her waist, Aster, who had never danced before, completed the dance in perfect harmony with Saya. It drew a round of applause. Saya leaned in close to her ear. He whispered, the restaurant we went to last time has new items. Want to go together? Saya invited Aster to go to the restaurant from last time. Aster smiled happily and very naturally agreed. The next day, while tidying up the tea set, he suddenly remembered what Saya had said. His heart started racing and his face turned red. Is this a date invitation? Is this what they call giving the green light? Then he paused. Am I getting too excited? After all, men here flirt as frequently as they breathe. I can't let my guard down just because it wasn't mentioned in the escape season. After all, Yug has the attribute of making people fall in love with him. Currently, I can confirm I haven't fallen for him. Only Klein and Saya don't have much screen time. They're people with almost no presence. I still need to be cautious. At this moment, Anna curiously asked about his relationship with Mio and Klein. Let me tell you a secret. King Aegis actually loves his son very much. This news shocked Astor. If he had to say it was a relationship without any real meaning, Aster couldn't answer. Whispering gossip, does Mio have someone he likes? And is she a beauty? But Anna and Ellie found it strange. Mio gave the impression that he liked Aster. However, Aster had never thought about it that way. He just felt they were close because they lived together. He believed that hearts might change, but love wouldn't easily alter. At least that's how he was. That day, Aster stared at the two sleeping figures playing point fragrance, deciding from whom to borrow money. When he pointed at Mio, he shook his head, thinking Mio looked like he had no money. Then he raised his hand and slapped him hard, waking Hill from his sleep. He clutched his arm, which was stinging with pain. Aster apologized half-heartedly, then smiled brightly. Let me some money, like the rent from before. I'm going on a date. Hill instinctively thought he was going out with Mio. Sir, Mio didn't seem like someone who couldn't afford a date, but Aster said he wasn't going on a date with him. Hill stared thoughtfully at Mio, who was pretending to sleep. Then he kicked him to the ground. He even questioned from above, aren't you and Aster in a relationship? This is like a story about my parents who aren't married.